Hi, Erin. Hi, everybody. It's good to see some familiar faces as well, some new faces. Great. Okay. And so I believe that we can probably get started. We'll probably see some folks trickle in. But again, thank you all for being here. We are very excited to be with you all today and to share a little bit about what today's session is about. And so we have released a request for ideas and we'll be going into depth today to really share what this process and this initiative is all about. And so to begin, I and we actually know that some of you might be regulars to virtual community meetings. And we also recognize that we may have some folks who are newer to the virtual meeting setup. And so as a reminder, we basically just want to ask everybody to stay muted throughout, at least during our presentation portion. We also want to share and first start out by saying that we are offering interpretation services today. And so if you have a laptop or desktop, you can look for the globe sign at the bottom right of your screen. And we are offering interpretations today in Cantonese, Cape Verdean Creole, Haitian Creole, Mandarin, Spanish, and Vietnamese as well. You might also notice that we are having some technical difficulties. And so we've created different versions of the languages themselves. And so if you can see on the bottom left here, Spanish will actually be labeled as Spanish, moderated and interpreted by Miguel Moreno. Vietnamese will be, if you can select German, that's the language that will be interpreted in that space. Cape Verdean Creole, please feel free to select Portuguese. And I will also drop this in the chat so that it's easier to find. Great. Okay. Great. And so, great. In terms of Zoom guidelines, as I mentioned earlier, we might already be familiar with the virtual environment and the virtual space, but just wanting to ask folks to, again, during our presentation, if you could please stay muted throughout. And we will be able to, and we've carved out some time and plenty of time to actually go over any questions, any comments that you might have as well. And so for this later feedback portion, one of us will also make sure to call on you to unmute yourself to share. But most of today's session will really be open for your feedback, for your questions, for your comments as well. And we will also have the chat open for questions and comments during the presentation itself. And as many of you might have heard at the start of this call, we will be recording today's session. The recording will go live on our webpage and folks will be able to visit and revisit this recording at a later time. This will also provide us with an opportunity to share this information with those who are unable to attend today's session. And if you would not like to be recorded, please make sure to turn off your video while answering any questions or while asking a question during the feedback portion. And so in terms of who is here with us, so we have community members, including residents, representatives from neighborhood-based groups and organizations. We also have the Boston Society for Architecture here present, the Mayor's Housing Innovation Lab in partnership with the Department of Neighborhood Development, and also the Mayor's Office of New Urban Mechanics. And we also have designers, architects, developers, and more folks who are truly advocates for how housing and how affordable housing can be and should be built in the city of Boston. And what we hope to really take away and leave the space with is a deep understanding of the role that housing types like the three-decker, which we'll go over in depth a little bit more later, can really play in our neighborhoods and in the city. Also a general understanding of what a future decker could be. I feel as though many of you might have been asking the question, what exactly is a future decker? Also what will be asked in the requests for ideas that we've just launched and released, and also to learn a little bit more about this year's housing innovation competition process. And finally, how to participate and get involved in this process and this early setting for the competition as well. And in terms of our discussion topics, the format of our meeting today will take place in 3 different parts. And so I myself, Wandy Pascual, I'm a housing fellow with both the Housing Innovation Lab and the Boston Society for Architecture. I'll be presenting part of today's session, but also I'll be joined by my colleagues, Jenny Efron from the BSA and Dr. Taylor King from the Housing Innovation Lab. And so we will go over a little bit of the background, right, of the work that we've done this past year around triple deckers, but also starting to have a conversation about future deckers, and also transitioning into really learning about and having a brief overview of the multi-housing landscape in Boston. And finally, introducing the future decker, right? And so what are the potential benefits of this building type and what this housing type could bring to residents as well. And because it does seem as though I've gone over terms that might be unfamiliar to folks, we thought that it would be helpful to actually go over a glossary of terms before engaging in today's conversation. And so first, starting with what exactly is a future decker. And so a future decker, simply put, is a new rendition, a reimagined version of existing triple or three deckers that could really provide affordable housing opportunities and options for current and future residents of Boston. We will also be mentioning infill lots, right, or sites. And so these are sites that have not been developed or are now open after older structures have been removed. Multifamily housing, right, which is essentially buildings that include at least 2 homes. And also middle scale housing. So this is a type of housing that would range from 3 to about 15 units and can be challenging to build for a number of reasons. And we'll go over that a little bit more later as well. And lastly, requests for ideas, right? And so this is a document, it's an ask and an open call where we ask and invite folks to participate, folks from all different sorts of backgrounds, to really help inform the city's approach for overcoming housing development challenges. And with that said, and I actually believe that, so again, like I mentioned, in terms of how we will engage in conversation today, we will be sharing an oral and visual presentation for the first part of today's session. And then later on, we'll leave things open for the feedback session. So here you'll be able to raise your hand. And then also you should be able to type in a question or comment. This you can do throughout the presentation itself. And then during our questions and answers section, please feel free to unmute yourself and then to ask your question and then comment as well. And I will actually transition things over to my colleague, Jenny Efron, who will give a little bit of background of who we are.
Thanks, Wandy. Hi, everybody. I hope that you're all doing well on this summer-like evening. And again, if you have questions throughout this, please put them in the chat, and we certainly will do our best to get to everything. So just a little bit about who we are, the Boston Society for Architecture and the Mayor's Housing Innovation Lab. So as you can see there, the BSA is both a local chapter of AIA and also a nonprofit community committed to improving the quality of life through architecture and design, which we offer a number of public programs. And the Housing Innovation Lab was established in 2014, and they prototype different approaches to increase affordable housing, and they prioritize the needs of residents by engaging with a range of collaborators. Excuse my assistant there, she's small and lots of questions. But next slide, please. And in the past, the BSA and the Housing Innovation Lab have collaborated on some really exciting projects that maybe you have seen or heard about. In 2016, the Urban Housing Unit, which was a 365 square foot model of what a small unit of housing could look like. It traveled around to 6 different neighborhoods throughout Boston as a way of doing community engagement and asking people if they felt like they could live there or if they knew people that would live there, which was also the start of a multi-year process that led to the first housing innovation competition, and also helped to spark the City of Boston's compact living pilot. Our housing committee at the BSA also worked with the iLab through their initial additional dwelling unit pilot to help sort through the zoning and see what it looked like. And also volunteers helped some of the first homeowners go through that process. And that all led us to think about how we could really make this partnership something more formal, which has led to our partnership in this housing fellowship and our work with the wonderful Wandy. So in 2020, we started by saying, how are we going to approach our next initiative? And we started by going back to a familiar housing type, the triple decker, and started again back with community conversations. And the picture all the way on our right is from one of the last in-person meetings we were able to hold that was in the Eggleston Square Library Branch. Next slide, please. So some of the lessons that we've learned from the triple decker, I'll just go over to sort of where we base it from. So what is a housing type and building type that can be found in most of Boston's neighborhoods? The triple decker. I think there's somewhere around 13,000 of them existing in Boston today. This is something that's familiar to people walking the streets, part of our cityscape, part of what we know and think of when we think of Boston and cities and towns throughout New England. So triple deckers or 3-deckers, depending upon where you live and how you've grown up, were mostly built between the 1880s and 1930s, and they were an entree into home ownership for many immigrant working and middle-class families. A lot of people will have memories of one family member who owned one unit and rented it out to other family members, and just having them as family gathering places. They often have similar architectural features, front or back porches. They are usually 3 stacked units that are of the same layout. And they also often were built on small lots. They have not been built in more recent years due to zoning and policy measures that have outlawed them. So a lot of them that we see are older and some issues that come with that, but also the things that we love and recognize about that. And I love seeing those people sitting on the stoop there today. It just sort of reminds me of what you'd want to be doing today in the city and the community. Next slide, please. And so those are just some images of, the typical sort of triple decker or similar buildings that you would see, what we also call a 6-pack, I think, up there on the right as well, that you see all throughout Boston. And I think that we have a map as well. And I will slow down. So I'm sorry, the map on the right-hand side is shows you the types of housing on a map of the city of Boston. So in pink, we have 3 families. And then in orange, 1 and 2 families. Apartment buildings are in blue, and condos are in purple. And condos, I know, is sort of a little bit, condos represents an ownership style rather than a building size. And so those could be different building sizes. And then the green is open space. And so you can see that in Dorchester and Roxbury, Mattapan, East Boston, and parts of South Boston, there are still quite a number of what we call triple or 3-deckers or 3-family homes. So when the BSA and the iLab and the Housing Fellowship came together to say, how can we talk about this type of housing and make it relevant to today? We thought, let's talk to people about their experiences with this type of housing. And so, as we saw a couple of slides ago, we started out with community conversations to ask people, what are your experiences with triple deckers? Did you live in one? Did you have a relative or a close friend? And so we were able to talk with people about how they experience triple deckers. And so much of what we heard was about the community experience, whether it was cooking or gathering or just sitting on a porch and sort of watching the neighborhood go by. And as we transitioned into virtual conversations, we were also able to have talks with people about the changing ways in which we've all been using our homes during the pandemic. And so whether it was being grateful to have a porch or, sometimes it was seeing your neighbors more or feeling scared to see your neighbors and living in that communal way. So all of those things, the good and the bad about living in this building type and community and how we see it. And so we took these conversations and workshops, and we also had a partnership with Wentworth Institute where we worked with architecture students to explore triple deckers. And we took all of this and we put it into a virtual exhibition on the BSA website in the fall of 2020. Along with that, it was called Past, Present, and Future Decker. And the nice thing about the virtual and digital age is that you can still see it today. And Wandy, thank you, just put a link to the white website where you can still go explore the history of triple deckers, how they are used today, and sort of how we might use this as a beginning point to think about the way we would like to live in the future, how our homes could exemplify the best of what triple deckers offered, and how we might think about middle scale neighborhood housing in this way. Through the exhibition, we also were able to have conversations about sustainable design, about financing and financial issues, and also about how we might approach planning and housing development with an anti-racist design lens. Next slide, please. So we're not the only ones who have been talking about this lately, and maybe it's because we're so involved with this work, but I think we've been seeing more news coverage and more people talking about this kind of housing. Mass CEC recently held a competition to explore deep energy retrofits for triple deckers in order to make them healthier and more sustainable and more energy efficient. And we were excited to partner with them to showcase some of those really great ideas. There's also been more talk about the City of Boston's compact living pilot and how that can be used as an affordable housing mechanism. And all of this sort of also plays into what we think of in our neighborhood housing. So, not the really giant buildings and maybe not the single family home, but how do we sort of start to think about this type of housing again? And now I'd like to pass it along to my colleague, Dr. Taylor Kane from the Housing Innovation Lab to talk about multifamily housing in Boston.
Great, thanks Jenny and Wandy. So with that background set, we're really excited to share how we see this request for ideas process as a way of further venturing into this conversation, this ongoing conversation about multifamily housing in Boston. We could go to the next slide. But one thing we want to do before we get too far into that is just to take a step back and ask everyone to visualize what multifamily housing looks like and looks like in Boston, or maybe what they've seen in other cities. One of the things that we've definitely recognized over the course of this process is that this recognition that multifamily housing can take many different forms, from two-family homes to the iconic triple decker, which we've heard a fair amount about, to 12 packs to row houses to even larger buildings ranging from 7 to 30 unit apartment buildings. We know that multifamily housing is found in all of its forms on the many different streets of our city, sometimes multiple types on the same block. And we really know that these housing typologies play a really crucial role in how we think about and navigate our urban spaces. So if we can go to the next slide. We know that some of this housing type is made up of an older housing stock, but it's also housing that we are continuing to see constructed throughout the city. So looking at permitting trends from the past 10 years, we see that there is some diversity in the type of new buildings that are being constructed. And one thing that we really notice is that well, 17% of new permitted buildings are in this one family category. We see that there's a lot of potential in this 7 to 15 unit range, is having a lot of opportunity for potential expansion as we think about new housing types in the city. So when we think about what are some of the key takeaways when it comes to multifamily housing in Boston, the first piece that we recognize is that there are many existing residential building types that fit within this multifamily category, thinking about 2-family and 3-family in particular. We also believe that there's a lot of room for further innovation when we're thinking about this housing scale of 7 to 30 units. And then lastly, we really believe that there's an opportunity to define and promote how Boston thinks of this concept of a missing middle, which can refer to a range of housing that scaled buildings that have multiple units that are compatible in scale and form with the existing housing types in our neighborhoods and can really foster a walkable, welcoming neighborhood for many different families. So this begs a question of how can we support more multifamily opportunities in Boston, and where are some tangible physical places that we can turn to explore some of these ideas. So for us, we're really turning our attention to smaller lots and thinking about urban infill, which comes with its own set of challenges, but also comes with a lot of potential opportunities and benefits. So both Wandy and Jenny have spoken to some of the challenges when it comes to the cost of land, the construction costs associated with building new housing, some of the site limitations, and then this question around zoning and lack of predictability for communities and developers. And with these challenges, we also see lots of potential benefits and opportunities when it comes to looking at smaller lots. So this is really a space where we can promote responsible and sustainable uses of urban space. We can address the need for more housing options for different types of resident households. So thinking about the multifamily demand when it comes to households with children or couples who are interested in downsizing, really meets lots of different populations who are interested in multifamily housing. And then lastly, we really see this as a typology that provides opportunities for smaller scale actors. So thinking about contractors, builders, emerging firms, really expanding the ecosystem of who can participate in development in Boston. And then I think I'm turning it back over to Wandy.
Thank you, Taylor, and thank you, Jenny. And so, based off of what we've just heard, we have truly been thinking about how can we take the lessons from existing building types and really transform them into housing types that could serve the needs of both current and future residents in Boston. and looking to what we've described for the past year as the future decker. And so, as Taylor mentioned, in order to address our city's housing needs and challenges, we really should consider a multi-pronged approach, right? And so, how can we envision, how can we design and also build in Boston? And what are some of the ways in which folks have illustrated different guidelines and guiding points for how we can achieve these collective efforts? And so taking a look at our existing Housing a Changing City plan, that really named that we should be taking a look at our existing infill lots and thinking about how they can provide us with opportunities for mixed income home ownership and development, but also on the other side, thinking about some of the research that has been done in the greater Boston area about how the demand for multifamily housing is rising, right? And for a wide variety of folks of different backgrounds as well. And so we can also take a look at some of the ongoing efforts because we know that we can't do this alone, right? And so taking a look at the different initiatives and efforts that are taking place right here in Boston, thinking about the different ongoing neighborhood planning initiatives from our colleagues over at the Boston Planning and Development Agency, or even internally through the Department of Neighborhood Development, really taking a look at how we can observe different sites along Blue Hill Avenue to think about how we can provide both homeownership and housing opportunities, but also what the role of mixed use can really provide for communities. And our question for ourselves, right, through the lens of housing innovation is how can we test innovative approaches to housing development and also reimagine the various obstacles that are then associated with building on small sites. So we turn to our housing innovation competition format, right? And so a housing innovation competition is truly an opportunity to achieve a variety of goals. So one, thinking about how we can create impact, taking a look at ways to really design and build, and also how we can think about different levels of affordability for folks, how we can generate new ideas as well and really tackle different development challenges that we know we're unable to solve in-house or on our own, and thus also thinking about how we establish partnerships with other folks, how we collaborate with one another, and really think expansively of who is able to bring housing to Boston. And lastly, how can we also envision different replicable models, right? And so with our housing innovation competition, and we'll go over how we've worked with this model before, but taking a look at the sites that we have within our own inventory that are also representatives of other sites that exist throughout the city, how we can also think about demonstrating and really showcasing what feasibility of new ideas can really look like. And so in 2016, we engaged in a housing innovation competition. And so, apologies. It seems as though I will just need to pause for a moment. Okay. So, with our first housing innovation competition, how we worked with the Garrison Trotter Neighborhood Association as a group to really co-create and co-craft a request for proposals by taking a look at various sites within the Department of Neighborhood Development's inventory and thinking about how can we actually envision the role that compact living can play in this city and how to make this a feasible opportunity. And so the winning proposal was by Dream Collaborative, who was then awarded one of the sites on which to be able to build this innovative compact living project. And so we look to our housing innovation competition as also something that provided a number of learned lessons along the way. So taking a look also at how we've been able to shape the city's existing compact living policy, how we've been able to generate new ideas and really tackle different complex development challenges. Again, partnerships with neighborhood associations, but also local design community, residents of Boston, and so many other stakeholders. And then also thinking about how now we've been able to really take a look at this model across the city through various projects that are now in the pipeline as well. And for this year, we are hoping to expand upon this model of a competition by taking on this new challenge, right? So how can we take a look at different small sites throughout the city, but also even question the role that scattered site development can play on creating more affordable housing options for folks. Our ultimate goal here would really be to, again, demonstrate that feasible, replicable housing solutions can be created across a variety of sites, and sites that also are based in different zoning and neighborhood conditions, and also how we can break up the housing innovation competition process, this time by first starting with a request for ideas. And so showing our illustrated timeline for what we are envisioning with this process, really starting out with the first phase, which is also why we've gathered you all here today, by releasing a request for ideas. And this is now live, and I'll be able to drop a link in the chat so folks are able to also take a look at it. But really starting out with a request for ideas, an open call for ideas for anybody who would want to be involved in this earlier process. Also, in our midpoint, really taking the time to then showcase these ideas, right? Sort of saying, what have we seen? What do folks want to see in the city? And allowing for there to be input as well, to then have this information inform an upcoming request for proposals, which would mark the second phase of our competition, where we would ask established development teams to propose different types of models for what the future Decker could be, to hopefully at some point in the future be able to pilot this as well. And so what is a request for ideas? This is, again, an open call to any and all who are truly interested in seeing how this new yet familiar building type could really respond to the needs of residents. And also asking folks to imagine what this scale of housing could also provide. And so, as I mentioned, please do feel free to visit boston.gov/futuredeckers, where the request for ideas is now live in all of the spoken languages in Boston. And in this document, you'll be able to find a number of items, right? And so first, an overview of this first phase, this early phase of the competition, a continuation of the conversations that we've had with folks this past year, but really trying to think about what these ideas can then generate. Also the goals for the request for ideas, the various submission guidelines, the list of the sites that we've included in this document, and lastly, a list of resources for applicants. We know that typically folks that are able to be a part of housing innovation competitions or competitions in general are those who are already familiar with the processes of how housing is created. And so what we are hoping to do is to really allow for there to be an opportunity for folks to collaborate with one another and to be able to collaboratively participate in this effort. And so in terms of the goals that you'll find listed in this document, we are hoping to really see ideas that promote affordability through innovation in all senses of the word. We're also hoping that the ideas are able to really express how we envision ways to diversify the city's housing stock. Ideas that can really create equitable, sustainable, and healthy neighborhoods, understanding that there's a lot of lessons that the three-decker or other forms of multifamily housing at this scale have been able to provide. And also, how can we co-create and really create connections among each other? so that we are all essentially present when these decisions are then made. And just a brief overview of how each of the phases will play out. So the request for ideas here, applicants will be able to propose these different ideas. Will also be asked to identify existing barriers. So what stands in the way of your idea coming to fruition, and really highlighting that as well. And then there will also be opportunities for folks to begin to form development teams that could then move to the second phase of this as well. And so the second phase of this competition will include co-written requests for proposals for a yet to be selected site, and really taking a look at how these now formed development teams could submit proposals that demonstrate replicable solutions across scattered sites. Teams will also be asked to present their proposals to community members. And like I mentioned, this would then lead us to choose a yet to be selected city-owned parcel that would be awarded to the winning team as well. As I mentioned earlier, because we want to make this process take place a little bit differently, we're also providing two different tracks by which folks could respond to this request for ideas, right? And so the first one is a short response. This is a low threshold response. We have selected 3 very simple questions in a short form, and you would be able to send that along to us as well. And then the second track is of a longer response, right? So a limit of about 8 pages. We would ask for you to share who you are and where your idea would be located, and also to share your idea for the future Decker. And lastly, identify what the existing barriers are, if there are any. We're also offering a small number of resources this time around with this RFI. The first being technical assistance funding. And so folks will be able to request for any funding, and we have a small amount of funding dedicated to this as well. If there are folks submitting as a group, the maximum allocation for one single group would be of about $1,000, but this can go towards receiving internet access, right? Or even also requesting funding for childcare services if that is needed to complete a request for the ideas. We're also offering a service provided by the Boston Society for Architecture, which is the Community and Collaborative Design Initiative, which partners up, which matches actually designers with folks seeking design services for pro bono services as well. And lastly, we'll also be hosting a number of networking events. And so we'll have one networking event, and then we'll also have a sketch night where folks will be able to come in if they need a drawing or a sketch done to complete their idea, and have somebody sketch that out in real time as well. And we've also linked a number of resources in terms of relevant web pages that are available to folks, right? So the virtual exhibition that we shared, but also the Boston zoning viewer, where folks will be able to look up the parcels that are listed in the RFI and learn more information about the different sort of zoning challenges that may be posed. And also Building Housing, which is the Department of Neighborhood Development's webpage, where you can take a look and find out more about specifically projects that are either funded or sites that are owned by the Department of Neighborhood Development. And lastly, we certainly would like to share with you all which sites you could envision a future Decker being built upon. And so we've included a total of 13 sites in this RFI that are located in 4 different neighborhoods, that of Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan, and Hyde Park. These sites range in size, so ranging from 3,000 to about 8,000 square feet. They are located near public transit, They are zoned between single and 3-family, and they are also located nearby existing triple deckers. And so I will certainly be sharing these slides with you all after this information session, but just taking a look at a few of the sites that are included. And so in the neighborhood of Roxbury, taking a look at 3 sites in total along Washington Street, located directly next to newly built triple deckers. And pleased to find out more, you'll be able to access this information on the Request for Ideas document. But taking a look also at a few sites in the neighborhood of Dorchester, again, that are contextually nearby existing triple deckers, zoned for both 3 families and 2 families, and again, located near public transit options. In the neighborhood of Mattapan, taking a look at 2 sites along Belu Ave and also along River Street, ranging from 4,000 to 6,000 square feet. And lastly, 2 sites in Colchester, on Colchester Street in the neighborhood of Hyde Park, which is also, this one is zoned for single family, but is located near public transit as well. And so we will pause here for any questions that folks might have or comments, and we would be happy to answer these as well. Thank you.
Yes, hi, hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, hi, I designed new triple decker in 2004, presented at BSA. Since then, I dropped the ball. It was not implemented. But now I'm interested in doing that. But in terms of obstacles on your program, I wonder how many of you young people heard of social housing that is practiced in Austria, Finland, Sweden, Denmark, and other European countries, and now began practicing in Canada. How many of you, can you tell me? Raise a hand. Okay, good. So Jenny, what do you what do you think is a chance for that program to be implemented in the United States?
It's a great question, right? I think that you see occasionally one-off projects that you might compare to social housing. I don't think you see it far and wide. One of our partners from the MIT Urban Futures Lab recently put out Care House, which is a model for aging adults along with their home care workers to sort of live together and offer both services and a nice place to live for home care workers. And so I think you see it one off here and there, and I think that it's certainly a compelling and interesting idea that we would all be interested in seeing more about and exploring.
Yeah. So I was thinking about a municipal acceptance municipal initiative, because in Canada, I know only one city adopted this program, and you know the principle of it. When the federal government distribute funds to the states distribute funds to municipalities, and municipality build it, invite the builders to construct it. So do you think that the sites of cities from Mattapan and Dorchester would be interested in something like that?
Anatole, I think like the quick question, it's really funding. So like, I mean, so I think for the proposition, I mean, the city probably have to allocate funding exactly for that, because I think hard won't, I don't think you can do that with hard funding.
Right. Well, that's a big question, of course, but you know that the developers is a big reason why we have a national housing crisis. So I've been suggesting to various politicians that the developers should be removed from affordable, so-called affordable housing, because it's not really affordable. It's a subsidized housing, as you may know, right? So well, let the developers build what they do best, build the market rate housing, and create some sort of nationwide force to build a truly affordable housing, not subsidized. Make no small projects, right?
Certainly. I think also I see another question from Amanda in there. I don't know if Amanda, if you wanted to unmute or if you wanted someone to read it out.
Well, I just wonder what everybody thinks about this possibility. Should it be expressed in your competition? Can it be expressed in your competition?
And I think, Anatole, this is a great question, because that is part of the purpose of having a request for ideas, right? Is to also say, what are some of the ways that we can be thinking outside of the figurative box to say, could this be possible here? And I think that also with the various opportunities for conversations with other folks, particularly community members from these different neighborhoods, to really be able to say, would you be able to, are you also interested in this, right? And if so, to be able to partner up and network and to propose an idea collaboratively in that sense. And so I think that I would invite you to also reach out to folks who might be able to partner up with you and share an idea in that sense.
Yeah, working with Congress, as if Congress did not have enough bills waiting for them. Thank you.
Thank you. And yeah, Amanda, would you want to ask your question, or would you want one of us to read it as well?
Who are you talking to?
Great. So I will read this question in the chat. So Amanda's question is, would assumptions about reasonable zoning relief be considered as part of the RFI? And again, I think that, right, to those of you who will take a deeper look into the various zoning considerations for each of the sites, what would it take to potentially build a 3+ family on those as well? And so I think that these types of considerations are definitely something to consider, right? And say, are there alternatives that we should also be taking into account to provide more housing and more affordable housing as well?
It looks like there's a hand raised. Yep, the 617.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi. Yes, my name's Craig. On one of the streets that you referred to in Hyde Park, the Reedville section of Hyde Park. And many neighbors, when they found out about this idea, asked me to please get involved. As I'm involved in the neighborhood association, very involved. And I have a question for the housing lab. Is and this sounds like an open-ended question, but does the housing lab believe in the principle of zoning bylaws? And if they do, what would be the purpose of having zoning bylaws? Fairly loaded question.
Yeah.
You do believe in the principle of zoning bylaws?
I do.
Okay. Because in my view, the zoning bylaws were not put in place to punish. They were put in place for the preservation of safety and quality of life. And I'm referring to a particular parcel that you're looking at squished between two multifamilies. And the same day that the neighbors gave me this flyer that you handed out for across the street from it, we're watching the news, and all of us apparently had the same thought because they all called each other and said, "Did you see the Revere fire?" When the multifamilies were on top of each other, and they all went up in flames, half of them demolished. Today's news, on this day of this meeting, you see the Dorchester fire, a 7-alarm fire with 3 triple deckers on top of each other, and they all caught. There's a 7-alarm fire. There is a reason for zoning bylaws. It's not to punish. It is to preserve safety and quality of life. I'm not personal experience. I have a 3-family. We have a nice diverse stock, which is what your goal is, and I think you kind of contradicted yourself. You're doing this to incite a diversity in housing stock. But you started off the whole meeting talking about how many 2-families and 3-families we have a good stock of 2 and 3 families, as well as apartment complexes and single families. I don't think there's a dearth of what you call the triple deckers. I do have a 3-family. A house was placed underneath me violating zoning bylaws before I ever moved in here. And now the ice blocks that are running off my roof are tearing up the siding of his house because they didn't obey the bylaws. There's a reason why we have bylaws and we don't build on top of each other. Those little lots that you're looking at in Colchester should not be accommodating multifamilies. They look like side yards to the a reasonable side yard to the existing multifamily. That multifamily now is going to have no yard, and we're going to be putting in a dense development right on top of them. We don't think in this neighborhood. I mean, I'm hoping this housing lab, this program, and I think you did it a little backwards. I'd like to have seen you going before the neighborhood associations first to talk about what their feelings are regarding the matter. And I don't see that as part of your plans. You went through your 3 phases, and I didn't see once where you said, "Hey, let's go meet with the neighborhood associations, have a community meeting on the subject." Because I tell you, at the next neighborhood association, this is going to be a hot topic.
Greg, thank you so much for those thoughtful responses. And we have been reaching out to neighborhood associations to request meetings, have had some with the few, and will continue to do that as neighborhood associations respond, which we hope they do. And I think that what you point to about the fire dangers also speaks to the age of many of our triple deckers. And we would love to hear about ideas to make multifamily housing that is safe, that is built with healthy materials, that is energy efficient, and think about the ways in which we can improve upon that. And I think that also important to mention here is that when we say future decker, we're thinking of things that are inspired by the triple decker, but not necessarily that it's a triple decker, right? And so we want everyone to sort of use their creativity to think about what fits in a neighborhood that offers people an affordable, safe, healthy opportunity. And, we're also here to hear about people saying, we don't think that this is going to be a good site for this. That's okay too. And so there is no plan for that lot right now. There is no plan for any of these lots right now. It is an ideas phase. So thank you so I'm glad that you're part of this so that we can continue to have these conversations.
I appreciate it, but none of the Hyde Park Neighborhood Associations, I'm talking the Regional Watch or Hyde Park Neighborhood Association, has gotten any word from you yet. So those are 2 neighborhoods that you haven't gone to, and those are the ones that watch over the quality of life here. So we'd appreciate further contact.
Absolutely.
Further attempt. I appreciate your time today.
Absolutely. Katie Faulkner, I think you maybe had.
I did. I wanted to follow up on that because I am so excited about the approach for this with competition, which I think is actually different than the last one that we didn't actually submit, but I certainly looked at it. And having neighborhood associations get involved and people from the neighborhoods is a fantastic opportunity to do something a little bit different. So while I can totally understand the speaker's frustration at not having yet been contacted, and neighborhood associations are generally armies of volunteers, so God bless them, and they certainly need to be part of the conversation. But if we can figure out a way, I think particularly in this ideas phase, to incorporate some of the neighborhood associations in the submissions, that would be fantastic. Because I think one of the frustrations that all of us feel in our various neighborhoods, and I'm not in the Hyde Park neighborhood, I'm in the Jamaica Plain neighborhood, but it's just so expensive to do anything now that the notion of kind of this missing middle for just regular people is a very hard thing to tackle. So it's a conversation that goes beyond the designers, beyond the BSA. So anyway, I'm very happy that we would have representatives from neighborhood associations, and hopefully when we put teams together, they'll be blended like that. So everybody will get to participate. I think it'll be a lot of fun. Thanks.
Yeah, I too would like to comment on the previous speaker, this concern about the zoning bylaws. The zoning is predominantly designed by NIMBYs, not in my backyard people. And that's how the original triple decker was killed after the 30s and 40s, because the people the middle class and rich people did not like those toiling masses concentrated near them. So this is a socio-political question, and again, it needs to be addressed nationally.
Thank you all for your comments as well. And if there are others who would want to ask any questions or provide some comments, I'd be happy to respond.
We have a couple of questions in the chat, one from Riley Smith.
Hi, yeah, my question is whether there are cost estimating tools that those of us who aren't, say, real estate developers could use to help create ideas that are feasible. Because I know that's one of the big frustrations with designing housing like this is you can come up with a beautiful idea and then be told it's too expensive and it will never work.
That is a great question, and I will actually also defer to some of the developers or folks that work in financing that would be able to provide any context on this. Because I think that this is a real sort of like way to also think about who might you be in touch with, who might you reach out to imagine what these sort of like cost analyses could look like. I also see Chris's question about, does the future decker idea include any idea of overbuilding on existing triple deckers going up to 5 or 6 stories if existing foundations could take it? And I believe, so this is an interesting question. We know that our colleagues over at Mass CEC recently had done a triple decker design challenge where for one of the propositions, it would be, how can one consider building an additional floor or a unit on top of an existing triple decker? But for this competition and this request for ideas, we will be taking a look at infill and available sites. Also, were folks able to access the webpage? I recognize that it could be helpful also to be able to take a quick look and peek at the RFI itself.
One more note, if I may. From my experience, when I worked with a small developer in Brookline, we figured out that a lot of old existing buildings were building so-called garden apartments, you know, which means living in the basements. I designed a couple, but this is not the solution. Okay, the solution, of course, is built up, not down. Nobody wants to live in the basement, even with a small garden on the ground. This, but the demand is very pressing. Okay, so obviously the population is growing everywhere, and um, it, in, what I'd like to also point out is that so far we're talking about so-called urban sprawl, but the suburban sprawl like Brookline is even more pervasive than urban sprawl, and that's even creates even a harder problem with transportation, pollution, and environmental destruction.
I also see Taylor's question in the chat about how to view the sites on the map on the webpage. And so you should be able to see a small icon on the top left that then lists all of the sites that are included in the RFI. And by clicking any one of them, you should also be able to view a little bit of information about them. Right. And so it could also be helpful for me to, and I'll just share my screen once again for what we have coming up. And so I will just share now. And so tonight's info session, as we said, has been recorded. And so we'll also be including that on our webpage. And then we will be having a tentative close for the RFI submissions on July 2nd, also recognizing that we would like to showcase some of these ideas on our webpage. And so we will be essentially reviewing a few of these ideas as well. And but what I will say is that we'll also be taking in and considering any ideas that folks submit beyond this date. And in terms of ways to connect with others, to really partner up and collaborate on this effort, we will be hosting a networking session on June 9th from 5:30 to 7 p.m. And we'll also include the links for folks to sign up in the chat. And lastly, on June 16th, we are planning to host our sketch night where folks, particularly those who would want any quick sketches of their ideas, can come in, and there will be an artist present that would work with you to create a sketch or a drawing for your submission. I believe that a few of my colleagues will be dropping these registration links in the chat as well. And I will also say, just once more, thank you all for joining us today. We will stick around if there are any additional questions that you might have, but we truly look forward to collaborating with you. And you can reach us at futuredeckers@boston.gov, and also reach us through phone by calling 617-635-0259. And we'd be happy to get in touch with you as well. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you also to all of the interpreters tonight.